I was 22 years old when I gave birth on my bedroom floor, and I'll never forget the way the midwife's face changed when she walked through the door. She had delivered hundreds of babies in our community, but the moment she saw what was in my hands, she backed away so fast she knocked over the basin of water my mother had set. Out! Her hand went straight to her apron pocket, and I watched her dial 3 numbers I'd only ever heard whispered about in stories meant to scare us into obedience. The police. She called the police on a 22-year-old girl who had just given birth, still trembling on a pile of towels, and everything I thought I knew about my life shattered in the 37 minutes it took for them to arrive. The labor started on a Tuesday morning when the sky was still that deep blue-gray just before dawn. I was in the barn, sent out to check on a mare due to foal any day. One animal in labor and one girl in labor, both of us hiding it as long as we possibly could. I had been hiding my pregnancy for 7 months in a household with 9 siblings, 2 parents, and a constant stream of community members in and out for meals, for worship, for barn raisings. 7 months of loose dresses, strategically pinned aprons, and lying flat on my back in the middle of the night when the cramps came, convinced that if I just prayed hard enough, God would somehow make it all go away. I didn't know I was pregnant until I was nearly 5 months along. I had never been taught what the signs were. My mother didn't speak of such things. When my body began to change, I thought I was sick. When I felt movement, I told myself it was indigestion. By the time I understood, I was too terrified to speak. In our community, an unmarried woman with child was not a victim. She was a sinner. The circumstances didn't matter. The man's role didn't matter. What mattered was the visible proof of sin, growing larger every day, impossible to hide forever. I managed. I wore my dresses looser. I avoided standing sideways when the elders visited. I did my chores with my head down and my hands folded over my belly when anyone looked too long. My mother, I think, suspected something near the end. But in our world, suspicion was not an invitation to speak. Speaking made things real. Silence kept them manageable. So she said nothing, and I said nothing, and the baby kicked against my ribs while I sang hymns in church with my head bowed. On the morning the labor started, I was in that barn with the mare, and a pain so sharp hit me that I grabbed the stall door and held on, breathing through it. I stayed there for another hour, timing the waves of pressure. When I couldn't stand anymore, I told my mother I was sick. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes tracing the outline of my body under my dress. I saw something flicker there. Recognition. Then she turned away and told me to go lie down. I went to my room, the room I shared with 3 of my sisters. I pulled every towel I could find from the linen closet, layered them on the floor, and waited. I could hear my siblings downstairs, my mother cooking, the normal rhythm of a normal day, and I was on the floor biting down on a rolled-up cloth so no one would hear me scream. Good girls don't scream. Good girls don't get pregnant. Good girls don't exist anymore once they do. The labor was fast. By mid-afternoon, the pressure had shifted downward. I had seen animals give birth. I had seen my mother give birth. I understood the mechanics, but understanding mechanics and feeling your own body split open are 2 entirely different things. When the baby finally came, when I reached down and pulled that tiny, slippery body onto my chest, the world went silent. Not quiet. Silent. All the sound sucked out of the universe. Just me and this small, gasping creature covered in blood, and I was supposed to feel joy or something holy, but all I felt was terror so pure it was like ice water in my veins. The baby was alive. A girl. She was small, smaller than I expected, but she was breathing, her chest rising and falling, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I didn't cut the cord. I didn't know how. I just held her against my skin, shaking so hard my teeth chattered, and waited for someone to find us. Eventually, my mother opened the door because she hadn't heard me move in hours, and even her practiced denial had limits. She saw me on the floor, saw the baby, saw the blood. Her face went white. She stood there for a long moment. Then she turned, closed the door behind her, and said 5 words I will never forget. I'm calling the midwife. Don't move. The midwife in our community was not a medical professional in the way you might imagine. She was a woman who had delivered babies for decades, carrying knowledge passed down through generations. She knew how to handle breech births and hemorrhages when the nearest hospital was an hour away and no one had insurance. She was skilled. but she was also a witness to the circumstances of every birth. She reported back to the bishops, the men who decided who stayed and who was shunned. A midwife could save your life. She could also ruin it. Her name was Sarah. I had known her my entire life. She had delivered 3 of my younger siblings. She was a heavy woman with strong hands and a face that rarely showed emotion, which made what happened next even more shocking. When she walked into my room, the first thing she did was kneel beside me and check the baby. She lifted her, listened to her breathing. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. The baby was okay. Small, probably a few weeks early, but okay. Then she turned her attention to me. She checked the bleeding. She checked the afterbirth. She did all the things midwives do with calm efficiency. For about 10 minutes, I thought everything would be fine. I thought the community would handle this the way it handled everything, quietly, privately, with a mixture of shame and practicality that allowed us to keep functioning. Then I watched her face change. She was helping me deliver the placenta when her hand brushed against something on the floor, something I had been clutching when she walked in. I had forgotten it was there. In the chaos of the birth, it had slipped from my hand and become hidden under a fold of bloody towel. When she moved the towel, she saw it. She picked it up. And the sound she made was not a word. It was a sharp intake of breath that was trying to become something else and couldn't. She just stared at it. Her hands that had delivered hundreds of babies without trembling, began to shake. She looked from the object to my face, back to the object, back to my face. I watched her expression shift from confusion to something I had never seen on an adult before. Something cold and hard. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice was very quiet. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up entirely. She turned the object over in her hands. It was fabric, torn, dirty, stiff with something dark that wasn't blood. It was fabric from a man's shirt, a specific kind of fabric, a specific shade of blue used only for the shirts worn by married men in our district, and stitched into the hem, barely visible unless you were looking closely, were initials, 3 letters, hand-embroidered, unmistakable. Sarah's face went completely still. She knew those initials. Everyone in our district knew those initials. They belonged to a man whose name was spoken with respect, a man with a wife and children, a man who sat on the council of elders, a man who had been in my father's house many times, who had eaten at our table, who had looked at me across the room with eyes that made my skin crawl. She looked at me, really looked at me, not through me, not past me, at me. Her eyes moved from my face to my arms, and I saw her notice the bruises there. Bruises I hadn't even realized I had. Fingertip-shaped marks on my forearms from the last time he had grabbed me. She saw the way I flinched when she moved too fast. She saw the terror in my eyes. "How old are you?" she asked. 22, I whispered. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something under her breath. I didn't catch all of it, but I heard one phrase clearly. I told him this would happen again. Again, that word landed in my stomach like a stone. Again. Who else? What did she know? Sarah stood up. She walked to the door and locked it. My mother was outside in the hallway, and I heard her voice, confused, asking what was happening. Sarah didn't answer her. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a phone. I didn't know she had a phone. Midwives were sometimes given exceptions for emergencies, but I had never seen her use it. She dialed 3 numbers and put the phone to her ear. "I need police at the Yoder farm," she said. "I have a 22-year-old female who just gave birth. There's evidence of assault. Send a woman officer." My mother's voice rose outside the door. "Sarah, what are you doing?" "We can handle this. The bishop will handle this." Sarah turned toward the door, and her voice cut through the wood like a blade. "The bishop has been handling this for 20 years. Look at what it's done. 20 years. I was 22. What did Sarah know that I didn't?" The police arrived 37 minutes later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, looking wildly out of place in our farmhouse kitchen with its gas lamps and bare wooden floors. The female officer came upstairs. She knelt beside me the same way Sarah had, and she asked me questions in a voice so gentle I started crying and couldn't stop. "How old are you? Who is the father? Did he hurt you?" Questions no one had ever asked me. Questions I had never imagined anyone would ask. Sarah stood in the corner of the room, still holding that piece of fabric. When the officer asked if there was evidence, Sarah handed it over without a word. The officer looked at the initials. She looked at Sarah. Something passed between them, some kind of recognition. "Sarah," the officer said quietly. "Another one?" Sarah didn't answer. She just looked at me. I was taken to a hospital for the first time in my life. I held my daughter while the paramedics checked her over. The female officer sat beside me in the ambulance. She didn't say much, but before she left the hospital, she leaned down and said something I have never forgotten. "You did nothing wrong. Remember that, whatever anyone tells you, you did nothing wrong." I didn't believe her then, but I remembered the words. I held on to them like I had held on to that piece of fabric. The investigation moved slowly. The man whose initials were on that fabric was an elder. His name carried weight. When the police came to question him, the community closed around him like a fist. I was told by multiple people, including my own father, that pressing charges would destroy the church. I needed to think about the greater good. Forgiveness was the only path forward. Forgiveness without accountability, without justice, without even an acknowledgement that something wrong had happened. 3 weeks after the police came, I was back at home, still recovering, still trying to figure out how to keep my baby alive. She was sleeping in a drawer I had pulled from my dresser and lined with blankets. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy footsteps, men's footsteps. My father's voice came from below, low and strained. "She's resting. This isn't a good time." And then another voice, a voice that made every muscle in my body seize up. "I just want to talk to her. I have a right." It was him, the elder, the man whose initials were stitched into that fabric. He was in my house. He was walking up the stairs, and no one was stopping him. I grabbed my baby from the drawer and held her against my chest. I backed into the corner of the room. The footsteps got closer. I could hear my father still talking, but his voice was fading, like he was stepping aside. The doorknob started to turn. I watched it move, a quarter turn. Then halfway, the latch began to click free from the strike plate. I could see the shadow of his feet in the gap under the door. And then another voice cut through the house like a blade. "If you open that door, I will make sure every person in this district knows exactly what you did. And I will make sure the police know you violated the protection order before the ink dried. Take one more step. I dare you." Sarah. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs. I couldn't see her, but I could hear her. The power in her voice was unlike anything I had ever heard from a woman in our community. Silence. The doorknob stopped turning. The shadow under the door shifted. The footsteps retreated back down the stairs. I heard my father say, "You had no right to speak to him that way in my house." And Sarah said, "You had no right to let him up those stairs." The front door slammed. Sarah had arrived at exactly the right moment. She told me later she had a feeling, a gut instinct that something was wrong. She had gotten in her buggy and driven 40 minutes just to check on me. When I asked her why she came, she didn't answer right away. She just looked at my daughter sleeping in that drawer, and her expression was strange, sad, far away. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Sarah sat on the edge of my bed. The room was dark except for a single candle. She was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke for words. I was 15. I stared at her. She didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the candle flame. "The same family," she said. "The same initials. Different man, but the same bloodline. His uncle." I was 15. No one believed me. The bishop told my father it was a misunderstanding. My mother told me to pray for forgiveness. And then everyone forgot. Except me. I never forgot. She paused. The candle flickered. I became a midwife because I thought if I was in the room, if I was the one holding the babies, I could protect them. I could protect the mothers. But I couldn't. Year after year, I saw the same thing. Girls too young, stories that didn't add up. And every time, the community looked away. Every time, the bishop handled it. Which means, nothing happened. Nothing ever happened. She turned to look at me. Until you held on to that fabric. You kept the evidence. I don't know if you knew why you were keeping it, but you did. And that gave me something I haven't had in 40 years. A chance to stop it. I didn't know what to say. I was 22 years old. I had just given birth to a child conceived through violence. I had been shamed and blamed and told to forgive. And now this woman, this midwife who had delivered half the babies in our district, was telling me she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. How many? I asked. 7, she said. 7 girls before you that I couldn't help. I delivered their babies. I kept my mouth shut. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but there's no peace in silence. There's only rot. The candle flickered again. She reached over and took my hand. I'm going to help you leave. If you want to, there are people outside. This community who can help. I've made contact with them already. I've been preparing for this for years, waiting for a girl who was ready to walk away. Are you ready? I looked at my daughter. She was so small, so fragile. I thought about what kind of life she would have here. The same life I had, the same secrets, the same silence, and I nodded. The next months were slow and careful. Sarah helped me get my identification documents in order. I had been born at home, no birth certificate, no records. She knew people who could help. She connected me with an organization that supports people leaving high-control communities. I saved money from selling eggs and baked goods, hiding it in a tin under a loose floorboard in my room. I told no one, not my mother, not my sisters. The only people who knew were Sarah and me. The day I left was cold, early spring, the kind of cold that gets into your bones. I waited until my father and brothers were in the fields and my mother had gone to the market. I packed one bag, I wrapped my daughter into blankets, and I walked out the door. Sarah was waiting at the end of the lane in a car, not a buggy, a car. I had never ridden in a car before. She opened the door for me, and I got in, and I didn't look back, not until we reached the main road. Then I turned around, just once. The farmhouse was small in the distance. I could see someone standing in the upstairs window. My mother. She didn't wave. She didn't come outside. She just stood there behind the glass, watching. And then the car turned a corner, and she was gone. Sarah was shunned for what she did. Formally, officially, completely cut off from the community she had served for 40 years. The bishops called her a troublemaker, a divider, a woman who had brought worldly corruption into the church. But by the time they shunned her, she had already helped 7 other girls leave, 7 girls who had been hurt in the same way, silenced in the same way, told to forgive in the same way. She couldn't help the first 7, but she helped the next 7, and those girls went on to live lives that would have been impossible if Sarah had stayed silent. Some became nurses, teachers, one became a midwife herself, a licensed one, with a clinic and a commitment to never looking away. My daughter is 8 years old now. Her teachers sometimes complain that she asks too many questions. She wants to know why the sky is blue, why the chickens cluck, why some people are mean and some people are kind. She asks and asks and asks until the adults around her run out of answers. Every time someone tells me she talks too much, I have to stop myself from smiling, because I was raised to believe a good girl kept quiet. My daughter is 8 years old, and she has never been told that her voice doesn't matter. She has never been taught to swallow her words. She has never learned that silence is safer than truth. That is the victory. That is the thing they couldn't take from me. They couldn't stop me from raising her differently. If you're carrying something right now, a secret that isn't yours to carry, I need you to know one thing. There are people out there who will believe you. There are Sarahs in the world, and they're not all midwives. They're friends, therapists, advocates, strangers on hotlines who will listen. You just have to find one thread, one single thread, and start pulling. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, please share it. You never know who in your life might need to hear that silence doesn't have to be permanent. I'll see you in the next one.